Good morning, welcome to another episode of Woodland Wednesday. If you're not sure what Woodland Wednesdays are, then I'll put the card to the first episode up here and the playlist will be at the end, so you can go and watch them. They're not long, 4, 5, 6 minutes, maybe maximum. I'm revisiting this shot today. I still don't know what to call it, so if you want to leave any suggestions, then please do so. There's a dog coming, so let me just stop this now. Things have definitely changed. Not a huge amount, but there are definitely more orange leaves here than there were before. So things are starting to turn. Now, weather in the UK has been, you can see I'm wearing a hoodie. In fact, it's a brand new hoodie. Hope you like it. It's my birthday today, so my lovely wife bought me this. And it's really warm, and it's been warm for the last week or so. And actually before that, so we haven't had any really cold weather. We haven't had a frost yet. We haven't really had any high winds. They were threatening those a couple of weeks ago, but I think the leaves were still too firmly attached. Now, there's a light breeze today. Leaves are just drifting down, so things are starting to fall onto the floor. We can see the canopy, the under canopy here, the floor is still covered. Lots of little mushrooms coming up. Be careful where I walk. Let's have a look at the scene though. So the tree nearest to us, the beech tree here, I would say now is probably about 40% yellow leaves and 60% green leaves. I think that's definitely a change. The woodland in the background still looks much the same. I don't think that's changed very much. So the oak trees are still stubbornly holding on. The silver birch is starting to go. And I think there's another beech tree in the distance here. Actually, the mid-ground hasn't gone. There's a one further here. If I just turn you round so you can see it, that one there is starting to go a lot more. So it obviously depends on whereabouts you are in the woodland as to what happens with your leaves. So I want to talk about the exposure triangle. Somebody asked me a little while ago about ISO and ASA. They're a bit confused what ISO was. So they remember film, and films came in different speeds, in other words different sensitivities. So we had 64 ISO up to 400 ISO in the early days. That got extended, and it's exactly the same in digital photography. So, but the good thing with digital photography is you can adjust the ISO, so you can turn it up, and I think it puts more voltage through the sensor, makes it gives it more power. So you can choose your ISO, and that kind of works quite well. So the exposure triangle is ISO, aperture, and shutter speed. Those are the three things that affect correct exposure. ISO I tend to have on 100, which is the lowest this camera goes, because that is the best quality. If I crank the ISO up to 3200, 6400, it means that I can play with the other two things, the shutter speed and the aperture, but it means the quality is not so good. We have lots of things called noise which come into play, and if you've ever photographed things in very dark rooms, you'll find that everything looks a bit low quality, a bit pixely, a bit sort of made up of blocks, a bit blocky. That's what happens on all cameras. Some cameras are slightly better, it depends on, but I'm not going to get into the details of that. So with my photography with landscapes, I'm on a tripod, which means that I can choose my ISO is going to be 100, because it's going to be the best quality most of the time. Aperture will change depending on the scene. So this scene, I want to get the nearest beech tree and the furthest beech tree in focus, okay, and that's affected by the aperture. So the smaller the aperture, the higher the number, the narrower the hole that lets the light in, that gives you more things in focus. That's just the physics of light. And with a scene like this, because I want those two things in, I'm going to use an aperture like f11, f16. 16 at the moment I'm choosing, and then the shutter speed will just be whatever it is to make the exposure correct. That's the third bit of the triangle. So 100 ISO, f16 are the two things that I'm choosing, and the shutter speed will have to be adjusted. Now it means on here it's giving me 8 seconds, and obviously I can't hand hold it for 8 seconds because it's going to be blurry. So that's why it's on a tripod, to keep everything sharp. The other things I have to consider in woodland is if it's a very blowy day, the leaves will be moving around, which then they will blur during those 8 seconds. Today we've got pretty much a still day, There's nothing going on there. I'm going to take that while it's completely still actually. There's nothing going on. There may be the hint of a leaf moving, but actually because we're looking really at colour and the scene, and the fence is not going to move and the tree trunks are not going to move, so just an odd leaf moving doesn't worry me too much. Now if I were to go to f11, that's half the exposure, that's letting twice as much light in as f16. That allows me to go from 8 seconds down to 4 seconds. So if I open the aperture by one stop, I can shut the shutter speed down by half. Okay, so go from 8 seconds to 4 seconds, f16 to 11. If I went from 11 back up to 16, the shutter speed would have to go back to 8 seconds to make the exposure correct. Now if I had f11 and 8 seconds, f11 8 seconds, and I raised the ISO up from 100 to 200, the same thing happened. I'd have to raise either the shutter speed or close the aperture down to make that whole thing balance. So I hope that explains it. Okay, so ASA was the American Standards Association, ISO is the International Standards Organization, probably. I'll put that on the screen. And that's how we get correct exposure. The other thing I want to talk about is composition, just briefly. So let me talk to you about the rule of thirds. Something called the rule of thirds. Now, compositional rules, which are apply in art and photography, are there to be broken, obviously, but I usually play with the rule of thirds quite a lot. So on your mobile phone, on your camera, you'll be able to turn on a grid almost certainly, and that gives you, if you imagine the screen as a rectangle, if you divide it into thirds, so you've got 2 lines going vertically a third of the way along, and then 2 horizontally a third of the way along, where those points intersect, so we've got 1 there, 1 there, 1 there, 1 there, those are the thirds. And the rule says that you should put the main focus, the main points of interest on the thirds, and you'll find that the eye likes it better, it looks nicer, it looks kinder. So with this kind of composition, I would probably have, now that first tree now is on exactly on the thirds. You can't see the grid lines, but I can, so that's dead on the third, the intersection is there. The other intersection is at the bottom of it, and then if we go along here, there's another one. And then here, ideally, would probably be that tree, but the actual third is there. Now to get that to do that, I would have to move this camera over. But the big camera is set up pretty much so that we've got those 2 trees on the thirds. And then the mid-ground, the middle bit, is the light patch at the back. It looks really nice. Right, I'm not going to rabbit on because this is a Woodland Wednesday and it's not supposed to take too long. So I'm going to pack up now. I'll go back to the office and I will show you in my study. I'll put these into Lightroom. When they're done, I'll put you onto the screen and I'll show you this week's with last week's, and we can see what changes we've got in this lovely woodland. But what a beautiful scene. What a lovely way to spend the start of your birthday, eh? So I've got this all set up in Lightroom. So let's dive in and have a look. It is from 2 weeks ago. Top one is from today. Differences are obviously the light's different. We've got more sunshine today. Last time I was there it was a bit wetter. It had been raining. I can't remember whether I used a polarizer on the first image, but I've certainly used one today. And I've also chosen a film simulation called Velvia. We were talking about film earlier, and Velvia is very rich and saturated, and it was probably what I would have chosen to shoot woodland. So that would account for the for the fact that the top one's richer. Interesting that I've pretty much chosen the same composition. It looks like I was slightly closer today, but not much. I did try to approach them differently. And other than that, let's have a look at the leaves. So we can see at the top here, that area and that area look pretty much the same. The only thing that's really different is this branch here seems to have gone, and maybe there's a few more colours at the top here. So if we zoom into the bottom image, that's pretty much green. This image here though, we've got a lot more yellows and oranges appearing. I'm going to zoom that back out again. I think what's going to happen in this particular autumn, because it's so warm, I think these will slowly start dying off as the light decreases, and they'll obviously die off, fall to the ground, and it will just gradually go sparser and sparser, almost like it's going bald, and then there'll be no leaves left. I don't think there'll be a sudden change of colour overnight, which is what I've been hoping for. The only thing that may affect that is if we have a really strong frost. If we have a strong frost and it's not blowing, we might find that that all happens a couple of days later. So this is my little Millie, who likes to lick my face. So that's it for another Woodland Wednesday. I hope you've enjoyed the episode. It's a bit longer than usual for a few extra bits, obviously, I wanted to talk to you about. So thanks ever so much for tuning in once more, and until next week, take care of yourselves. See you soon. Bye.